let you know the committee members. I'm David Gordon. I'm the chair of the POWMI committee. We have some members that are here. He's not in here. He's out selling his book, which is a good thing. Oh, he's here. Oh, he made it. I wasn't sure you were going to make it, Ishii. We have Wade Ishimoto, who is a vice chair for the committee. John Meyer, who's on the committee. John. Mike Elan, Cliff Newman, and Jack Call. Okay. We have some members who couldn't make it due to other commitments, which would be Jim Kimo Wheeler, he's still in Hawaii. Jim Latham, he's over in Southeast Asia. Nick Nichols, he's on the SFA cruise. And Mike Goodrich, who is the SFA member, and he's working with the cruise committee. But they all wish they could be here, and we'll push to get them here this next year. I'd first like to recognize all the Gold Star families. Would you please either raise your hand or stand up? These are what the reasons, one of the reasons we're here and what motivates us to keep pushing on. Okay. I'm going to turn it over now because you've heard enough from me. I want to turn it over to Mrs. Ann Mills Griffiths. She is Executive Director, Acting Executive Director for the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia. Ann, thank you very much.
Hi. Didn't know how many people were back there, but it's quite a few. I'm not the executive director anymore. I haven't been that for a long time, but I was chairman of the board also. It gets confusing, David, so I certainly understand. And then I thought I'd retired finally. I know last year I told you, I needed to retire, and I've been trying to retire forever. Well, I had. And as of June of last year, and then a previously loyal staff member not only ripped us off and committed major crimes and stealth of my identity and a whole lot of things. And so I'm working closely with the FBI and the IRS and you name it. So I'm now acting CEO because that's what the board voted me, so I could go back and do all of this. And I'm still trying to just find time to write the book I told you guys I was going to write, that I promised people that are no longer living, like Colin Powell and Jack Vesey and all those guys. So I've got to get it done some point because I'm running out of time, right, Cliff? We talked about this. I can't live forever, and I'm already 83, so I better get to it. So I'm trying to get the other stuff straightened out. But first, I really do appreciate the opportunity to be back here with you. If anybody understands why we're here, it's you all. And you know the priority you put on your own men, which, excuse me, which we certainly share. And we have a lot more of others in addition. Yours are tough cases. You all know that. But it also shows you recognize the meaning and the importance of not only honoring and remembering them, but learning more about what's going on to try to account for them and bring them home and devote our attention and our government's priority to the business of accounting for them with the priority that's necessary. You have some of the top people in the government here that work this issue, certainly Kelly McKeague, whom I've known since before he was in his position or any of those positions, and his wife, Nancy, who is definitely his strongest asset. And she's a dear. But you have some good people here from Stony Beach and DPAA, so please ask them questions. If we don't have time at the end, you can stop any of us. And Dave Huffman and his wife are here from Mission POWMIA, the newer organization that was started. I don't remember exactly when, but not that long ago. They're not antiques like we are. What we've done and what was so offensive about the attack on the League was, after being formed in 1970 and having 50-plus years of credible, responsible activity and action to prompt our government and always be legitimate and 501c3 and all of that, it was a stunning thing to see what someone could do and why someone would do that. You'd be interested in the fact that another informality, the FBI guys at the different, they have the main office and they have all these different stations. They actually were into competition because they all wanted to represent the League, because they're all retired military, and they were so offended that anybody would do that to the little tiny League that has worked so hard for 50 years for no reason except to bring our missing servicemen and civilians home. So I appreciated that enthusiasm and commitment that they showed, and they are doing a good job, but it's hard to put your finger on specifics. We may know more when I go back to DC this week after the dinner on Thursday night. And the next 2 weeks, maybe, because we understand that Jennifer has pled guilty, but all that means is she won't go to trial, so her husband probably won't also get indicted, guilty as we're confident he is in the overall scheme of things. But it's been another learning experience, like as if I haven't had enough learning about the U.S. government after all these years. So what got me into this was my brother. We got him back. It was a miracle. He was buried in 2019. Nobody ever thought we'd get him. Nobody in the government or anyone in our family. It truly was miraculous, and we all seemed to, in our family, felt like it was just a signal we needed to be doing what we were doing. My dad preceded us as truly an executive director 100 years ago. And he's been deceased since 1980. No, he was 67. He died very young. Tried to get me not to take this on. But then you feel like you have an obligation to. And what I've learned over the years is that obligation to stand behind the people that serve our country is something that's not just because we had somebody missing in our family. It's because you believe in standing behind the people that serve our country, and that's not only past and present, but it's future. And we all need to do a better job, and we're actively working on it, of educating the youth, and that's why I'm encouraged that maybe we'll see DPAA even doing more to help with our education programs across the country, to educate the school children who young people in the military even know nothing about what our country is doing to try to return those who weren't able to make it. I wanted to also, even the term "leave no man behind," that's really of relevant recent origin, and it really started with the controversies of the Vietnam War. And it's led from there to being like an accepted thing that everybody does. It didn't used to be, because it was assumed that if you went to war, you might get home, you might not, but all of the killed in action, body not recovered, were many, many thousands of them were buried at sea in sea incidents, and others were buried in U.S. cemeteries because their families were identified, they were notified they were killed, but they couldn't make individual identifications in those days. And what's happened, and what we're all very proud of, and what she represents here and works for Kelly and DPAA, is the best laboratory in the world, the most capable, certifiable, educating people, partnering with people, educating interns, pulling in new employees. But it's going to be their long term. That will be what they do the most. All accounting will be reactive rather than proactive, such has been the case on Vietnam War. However, we are also very concerned, as it has seemed that the proactive role on Vietnam War is more and more scarce. And we only have 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, left to try to locate witnesses that might have reliable, useful information. Other sources in the countries, the key countries for us, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Other witnesses have died, but the ones that have survived, they're less and less able to provide reliable information. Well, we'd be the same way. So what we've done, and what I'm really looking forward to hearing Eric Phillips' presentation today, he is the chief of operations for our proposal that we made during early this year's trip to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And fortunately, when at a good time, the guy that approved this ended up being the new General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam and the Chief of State / President, To Lam. And it happens to also be a guy that I've known and worked with for several years. So we were able to meet with him when we were there. And he was giddily happy about the proposal that we were pushing there for the mobile investigation unit. That's what we're trying to push, and General Secretary now, but it was Minister of Public Security at the time, To Lam, was giddily happy to approve that. He was traveling with the Prime Minister and burst through the back door in the middle of our meeting with his deputy, and he was grinning from ear to ear, and that's probably because he'd just gotten absolute confirmation that he was going to be the new General Secretary. But whatever it was, he's in charge of everything in Vietnam now. He is the big dude. And now is the time we need to push what he was so happy about. And that includes the archival information, as well as expediting the visits, which should be sooner rather than later, even though there have been unnecessary delays. But I won't go into those. It's too aggravating and irritating. So we won't go into those. But with Eric Phillips over there as the Chief of Operations and Brad Taylor as the Chief of Stony Beach, we're in good hands as they go to finalize those details with the Vietnamese. If there's anything that's going to save the DPAA priority and get answers for us in that process in the next 3 or 4 years, it's going to be the follow-up investigations that they're able to conduct, that Matt and his people are able to analyze and utilize and implement, and the archival information that they still have that they can readily provide, that we certainly have qualified U.S. officials on our side, so long as they don't all go to work on World War II in Korea. But that's a different subject, and I think we can do well, and I'm encouraged by the Vietnamese reaction, so now it's a matter of time to put up or shut up for To Lam and his cronies that he now controls in Vietnam. So we shall see, and Kelly's people will be the test of whether we can all celebrate together. We've been invited to come to Hanoi in April of 2025 to celebrate. It's kind of a hard one for me. I have to put it in certain terms. It's not just Vietnam's takeover of the entire country. I prefer to put it in terms like unification of the entire country under one leadership, or something that doesn't sound so pro-communist. I've had a unique relationship with all of the different governments there, and because I've been around so long and worked with them so many years, in every stop when we were just there, we met with senior leaders, including the new Prime Minister, Huffman's Prime Minister, right? He's the son of Hun Sen, it's now Hun Manet, but I've been working with his daddy since 1984, so I'm sure his daddy just said, yeah, you're gonna meet with her, go meet with her. But in any event, Hun Sen's not anybody to mess with. You do what he says. He's still very powerful, even though he turned this over to his handsome young son. And then in Laos, Salumsai is the deputy prime minister. I didn't see the prime minister this time, but I've been working with him for years. First met him at the Lao Embassy backyard party in D.C. a long time ago, before he was so important. So it is interesting that when we go, only because I've been there forever and shouldn't be still traveling that much or that far. I've known him so many years. So it's a matter, I've always been honest with him, totally honest. Now, I've not agreed with them on a lot of things, but they know I'm honest. And my policy is the truth is the truth, and no matter how you say it, it's still going to be the truth. And so you can say it to different people different ways, or different officials different ways, but I don't give them any wiggle room on the archival documents they can provide, and I certainly don't think the U.S. should be responding and providing them whatever they ask for in return for their cooperation, because we've already paid for it royally and don't need to be paying them anymore. We still are, to the tune of millions that we pay, not just for DPAA operations, but far, far beyond that, thanks to Senator Leahy, John Kerry, John McCain, other names that you would recognize. They're getting plenty from the United States of America to address what they call the, quote, war legacies, and they include our issue in that. I think it's important also not to think of this issue as just a war legacy. It is far beyond that. It's a commitment to the future for our military. It's a commitment to today and the future and our mentality as a nation. The gratitude we should feel for all of those who are willing to take the chance and risk their lives for what we believe in. So with that, I will turn it over to, you're going to introduce Kelly, I guess. I don't know how long I went, if it was long enough or not, but that's okay. I just did these remarks to put some thoughts into my alleged brain. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ann, for all the hard work that you and your committee has been doing for all these years and still continues to work for. And now I'd like to introduce Dave Huffman. He's the Executive Director for Mission POW MIA. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you to David Gordon and the committee for allowing us to be here today. And Mr. McKeague and Ann, appreciate you guys being here and speaking today as well. This is a great group, so I'm going to get right into our presentation. Again, I'm Dave Huffman. I'm the Executive Director for Mission POW MIA, and I want to give you a little quick background on us for some of the folks that weren't here last year. We were formed in February of 2023. Our leadership consists of families of MIAs and 2 retired naval officers, a retired captain and a retired rear admiral. We're based out of Chesapeake, Virginia. And in the last 20 months, we've been involved in over 100 plus events, whether they were talks or lectures or displays or you name it. We've traveled about 40,000 miles in the last 20 months, to include going to Vietnam. And we've had 30,000 plus engagements. That's talking directly to people. That doesn't include our social media or our website or anything. This is just, we do an event at a baseball game, and we put a slideshow up in the 7th inning stretch that touches 14,000 people or 8,000 people. So lots of things about what we do. Our whole mission is defined by our acronym SEARCH, and I'm going to go through that and talk a little bit about each one of the slides. Somebody's going to keep me on track, I know. All right. So S stands for seeking the fullest possible accounting. And how do we do that? Well, we have to work with the folks that are actually going over there and doing the recoveries, doing the business to bring our men home, our missing home. So we work with the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. We take every opportunity, bipartisan, to meet with whoever will meet with us. So Memorial Day, we went to the White House and we spoke to President Biden prior to leaving for our trip to Vietnam. That center picture there, you see members of the VNO SMP, the Vietnam Office for Seeking Missing Persons, when they came to Washington, D.C. last year. So you can see that we're involved heavily with different governmental organizations. And our involvement with DPAA has been straight from the start. We will praise in public, and if we have an issue, we'll shut the door and we'll talk about it. And we've had several cases where we followed up with families, assisting them in issues that they had, and it was handled. And so we're going to continue to move forward. We have to do this together. Engaging is the E, and that's like-minded partner organizations. So these are just some of the organizations that you see up here on the slide that we work with. One of the big ones is Gary Sinise Foundation, and next week we'll be holding our annual member meeting in Virginia Beach, and Gary Sinise Foundation just advised me a couple days ago they're going to sponsor the whole thing. So it doesn't cost our POW MI families to eat, to go to events, to communicate with each other. Another one that you see in the middle is the Vietnam War commemoration, and you see me pinning a Vietnam veteran and Jeannie giving him a hug. We have our members doing this across the country. We've probably penned about 300 Vietnam veterans over the last 20 months. And the MIA daughters that pen them always give them a hug because they can't hug their dads. And so it's very moving, and we've learned a lot from these veterans. This veteran right here is Hank Aaron's cousin, and when Hank was hitting home runs, he was getting shot. So he made that clear to us. The A stands for advocating, and this is for our missing and their families. So this is all about one family on these slides right here. You see in the center is the annual government briefing meeting. The slide to the left of the ROTC cadet, that is a cadet that we took to the wall on Vietnam War Veterans Day, March 29th of last year, and he was given a name and a picture, and he went down and found Colonel Warren Anderson. The picture on the right, we did a live Memorial Day presentation, and we had folks recreate the missing men and come in and tell their stories. It was a very moving event. And then in the center picture, you see Masters of the Air. It's on the movie screen. Well, that was in Hollywood, California. We reached out to Apple TV and told them about our MIA families, and they allowed us to bring 20 MIA families out to the world premiere of Masters of the Air. Researching and investigation, that's the R in search. And the map on the left there is all of our cases that we're working on. And the picture on the far right was a lady that came out of the mountains when we were in Vietnam and presented us with some dog tags and artifacts that she found. Now, the dog tags weren't from an MIA, but what we learned over there is every time somebody finds a dog tag, they say it's from an MIA. So we took it. We were very respectful to her. We turned that over to DPAA in country before we left. But it just goes to show that there are people over there that still are actively searching as well. This lady here also searches for missing Vietnamese soldiers. The C stands for conducting outreach and education. Ann mentioned the youth. We do a whole lot with the youth. That center picture there is a middle school where we spend a day every year with about 400 kids and run them through World War I all the way through the Cold War. The picture on the right was at the Welcome Home event in Washington, D.C. That's a family that lost their dad. He was a helicopter crewman, and so they saw our helicopter crewman display and came in to get a photograph. The picture on the far right, you see my wife Jeannie and a member of the Marine Corps League. That is the Bataan Death March that's held every year in Chesapeake, Virginia. So that's a 17-mile march where they carried Marine Corps flag and the POW-MIA flag. And then the bottom picture, you see Mr. McKeague. He's talking to that group of ROTC cadets that we brought up to Washington, D.C. last year. And then the last letter is H, and that stands for honoring the service and sacrifice of our POW MIAs and their families. And you can see the various events there, whether it's a missing man table, a visit to Arlington Cemetery. The center picture is a former POW. and presenting wreaths at Arlington National Cemetery. We have a multifaceted approach that covers all of these different aspects to keep the POWMI issue out in the forefront to the public. Some brought this up because most of you guys sitting in here are Army, I think. Mission POWMI initiatives for future U.S. Army leaders. The center poster was created by Jeannie. That is all the missing West Pointers from the Vietnam War. And that poster now hangs at the United States Military Academy in the Versailles Chapel, named after Rocky Versailles, who is on that poster. We are currently working on one for the U.S. Naval Academy and the U.S. Air Force Academy as well. The picture on the far right is an award we just started this summer called the Mission POWMI Character and Courage Award, and that was presented to graduates at the ROTC Basic Camp in Fort Knox, Kentucky. We presented 2 this summer, and they've asked us to expand the program to cover all the advanced camps as well. So it's another way to get the word out to our future leaders about the POWMIA issue. And then we work closely with ROTC units as well. That is the ODU group that came up for the Veterans Day. We went to Vietnam this summer as part of a trip with the U.S. Institute of Peace, and these were our core mission parameters that we wanted. Visit various museums looking for MIA artifacts, travel through provinces with high MIA cases, meet Vietnamese families who are also looking for missing loved ones from the war, and meet Vietnamese military veterans that may have any information about American MIAs, and then a potential artifact exchange. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. These are some of the veterans and family members that we met. The fellow on the left was a Vietnamese veteran that served on Hanme, which is an island in Thanh Hoa province. He had never been interviewed by the U.S. government before, and the Vietnamese provincial group there brought him to us and allowed us to talk to him. He did witness the crash of an A-1 Skyraider while he was on the island, and that individual was subsequently returned just a couple years ago in a unilateral turnover to DPAA. This is Hanme Island. That's a satellite a tactical image taken in 1967. And these are the cases around Hanme that we looked at. So there's 10 aircraft, and those are all the missing men. You see the reds are recovered cases. The bottom picture is Jeannie on the beach looking out at Hanme. That was the closest we could get to where her dad is located. We believe he is right behind her shoulder in about 70 feet of water with his crew, 2 miles offshore. So this will not be our first trip to Vietnam, or our last trip, or was our first trip, won't be our last trip. In the Thanh Hoa Provincial Museum, they have artifacts on display. I asked them, could I look at the artifacts? They opened up the case, and they allowed me to examine flight suits, boots, helmets, ID cards, blood chits, whatever I wanted to look at. We laid it out, we took pictures of it, and I asked them if they had anything in storage, and they said, yes, we'll be right back. And they went downstairs, they came back up with a plastic clothesbin that you can see there, with 2 helmets in it, also some original ID cards. Those ID cards, the one on the left, was on display, and as I examined it, I told them, this is a photocopy, do you have the real one? They went and got the real one for us. I've contacted this family, spoken to this family. They have not had contact with our government in about 15 years. Their mother, this was a rough issue, as it is for all MIA families. Now they are re-engaging with the government, and they've already reached out and received their case file. So that's just another positive out of this trip. This is in the Thanh Hoa Museum. We are standing over a mock-up of the Dragon's Jaw Bridge, where dozens of American aircraft were lost. And that's me explaining to the Vietnamese some information about their province and things that we are looking for. One of the museums we found in Quang Binh province, we found a pistol, and it was inside of a holster. So I asked them, can I see the pistol? They opened up the case. They took the pistol out of the holster and handed it to me. And the pistol had this name tape on the side of it. It says Lieutenant Archer. So Lieutenant Archer was a Marine Corps helicopter pilot that went down and was captured. He also returned home. So this is an artifact now that we don't have to look for anymore. We know it's a POW. We know he came home. So it's one thing that can be taken off the list of potential MIA artifacts that are in museums. We have some other examples of this, but I'm just trying to highlight a few today. This is a helmet that's in great shape. Is this a POW's helmet? Is this a MIA's helmet? The last American pilot to be shot down in the war was a fellow named Harley Hall, who has been accounted for. However, when we took that helmet and we posted it on a Vietnam War artifact site, we had people come back and tell us, that's puking dogs. They're out of Oceana, where we live. And we sent that to the base commander and the staff over there, and they were like, that's a puking dog's helmet. So is that Harley Hall's helmet? Is that another man's helmet? We don't know, but it's something that would be nice to be able to follow up on. Lastly, I want to talk about Refno 0899. He's one of yours. Sergeant First Class John Robert Adams, they called him Bob. He's on the blue poster there on the far end. Bob went missing after his helicopter went down west of Dak To, which ended up being Laos. And as everybody else was extracted from the site, Bob was left there. He was wounded. He was still alive, but nobody knows what happened to him. Shortly after that loss on November 8th, 1967, at 14:45 in the afternoon, by 1800, the U.S. military was pummeling that helicopter with 20 millimeter fire, 500-pound bombs, other things like that. What happened to Bob? Well, we don't know. But in the 1990s, Stony Beach and previous iterations of DPAA had visited museums, and they didn't get the cooperation that we got on this trip. They were able to write things down, in some case take a photograph through the case. And in this particular case, they found his ID card in a museum. What we wanted to know, is it still there? And if it's still there, how do we get it back? So when we went to the Ho Chi Minh Trail Museum, which was dark and it was hot, we used our cell phones as we were looking around, the light on our phones. That's the first ID card we found. And we asked, can we see it? The picture on the left, that's the Vietnamese colonel that ran the museum. She took her shoes off, climbed in the case, and she's like, is there anything else you want to see? So we started asking for all kinds of things that were in there, and we took a lot of photographs from that. But John's ID card is there, and this is it. The picture on the left or the right was a picture that was sent to his family. So that's all they had, and now we know that that ID card is still there. And we have expressed to DPA that we would like to get these items out of the museum. They 100% agree, and they're working efforts to do that. And we're going to talk one more thing about that. This was one of the most moving experiences that we had when we were in Vietnam. This is Repat 99. We were there when they did an honorable carry of 2 sets of osseous remains, hopefully to be identified as American missing personnel to end some families' grieving and uncertainty. And this was on the tarmac in Da Nang Airport. So Vietnamese, the Det from Hanoi, everybody was there. Very moving experience. This is the last thing I want to hit on regarding our trip to Vietnam. We took a wallet with us. The fellow in the top picture there standing next to me is a Vietnam vet. He was with 9th Infantry Division. So he was working out north of the Mekong Delta. And in 1969, he got that wallet that's in that picture right there. Inside that wallet are numerous letters home, information about about this fellow that carried the wallet, including his receipt for his AK-47. And so we took that wallet with us to Vietnam, and you see this general sitting there next to me examining the letters. The first thing he did was ask me, can I have it? And I said, well, this is our first day, so I got to hang on to this. We're going to meet a lot of other people, and I want all of them to see it. So we held onto that wallet, and after the repat ceremony, I met with the detachment and the general counsel for the U.S. there, Ms. Burns, and I decided that we were going to turn the wallet over to them. And the words from the veteran were, "Get something good for this." So I explained that and I stressed that we wanted something related to an MIA. And a couple of weeks ago, I got a notice from DPAA that there had been an artifact exchange on a high-level visit. The wallet was what was presented from the U.S. side, and in return, one of the items that the U.S. received was a dog tag of an MIA, an active case. So it met that veteran's expectations, it met our expectations. Hopefully the family's going to be notified and be able to have that dog tag. So this veteran now says, I have some more stuff. If it worked out good, he was going to give it to me. If it worked out bad, it wasn't. So if you guys are sitting on anything that it's time to get rid of, it's time to let go, please reach out to us, reach out to DPAA, share that with them. It may help bring John Adams' ID card home, for example, if we have something that we can exchange with the Vietnamese. When we were in Vietnam, that general that I showed you the picture of looking at the wallet, he's the head of the Family Martyrs Association. He was in D.C. this past weekend. We took him to the Vietnam Wall. We read him the names of every soldier killed at Hamburger Hill. We read him the names out loud of MIAs up and down the wall. He saluted them all. And while we were there, the West Point class of 1969 was having a reunion and a memorial service. And one of the generals from that group came over, met the Vietnamese general at the wall halfway, and they saluted each other. So the work that's going on, you never know one thing that you may do, how it's going to lead you down the road. That veteran with the wallet, I've known him for 35 years. Never knew that until I told him we were going to Vietnam, and we started having lunch and talking. So I know there's a lot of that kind of stuff out there, and now's the time to move on it. You see the photographs over there, that's the Qua Binh Military Cemetery. I explained to them unknowns and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the importance that we stress on the disinterments and the identification of unknowns, and we asked them, did they have unknowns in this cemetery? So they showed us what an unknown grave looks like. It says martyr's grave is the words that are inscribed on that. And then we went around to over 100 and put incense on each of those graves as a sign of respect for them. And in turn, when he came to the wall, he had a sign of respect for our KIAs and MIAs. Finally, that's Mandy. That's Bob's sister. She's the one still waiting, along with 1,574 other families from the Vietnam War waiting for answers. So that poster that Jeannie created has every one of their faces on it. And it's important that we never stop until we get answers. We have to keep this mission alive. And again, there's all kinds of ways to help. Just by talking about it is an example. But I wanted to come here today, give you a rundown on what we've been doing and what our future plans are. And those do include a return trip to Vietnam and also Laos, hopefully sooner rather than later. So I want to thank you all today again, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave, for that, all the work that you and Jeannie are doing and the mission POWMIA is doing. That was a great introduction and gives people an idea of all the work that's being done by a lot of different organizations to include Mission POWMIA. I want to thank you very much. I'd also like to add that the posters that you see displayed here were illustrated by Jeannie Huffman, Dave's wife, and she helped me, and we developed those last year, and they seem to be very well received by all the group here. And with Ann and her group and Dave and his group, and we're starting to others, we can hopefully get more and more chances to bring back those who have not made it back. Now I'd like to turn over to the Director of Defense, POW MIA Accounting Agency, Director Kelly McKeague. Thank you very much.
Good morning. It truly is a privilege for me to be back here at SOAR with you all, simply because I have the utmost respect and admiration for SOA and SFA, and particularly its MIA, POW MIA committee. You all are such staunch advocates for this mission and have been for decades. And for that, we in DPAA are most grateful. As I hope you've seen, this really is a team effort from the standpoint that we cannot do it alone. We're an extension of the government, but at the same time, we succeed because of organizations like the National League of POW MIA Families, like Mission POW MIA, who themselves are advocates for this important mission. One more time. What I'm going to do today is give you an overview of what it is we in DPAA do, and turn to my colleagues who will give you more of the details as to how we do it. The picture you see on this screen is one of our anthropologists. And you see, I hope you come away with, you see how the precision, the depth, the complexity of the work that he does at this particular site, which is the Savannakhet province in Laos. Now, the words you see on the screen are not hyperbole. This is a sacred mission because these Americans answered the call to duty, defended liberties, and more importantly, made the supreme sacrifice. It's also moral imperative because in doing so, we have a fulfillment to them and a promise to them. But it's also moral imperative to their families. And you were introduced earlier to several Gold Star families, sisters, daughters. And one would think that time would heal. Decades have passed. Surely these families have moved on. They have not. Nor should they. They still pine for, they still demand, they still are deserving of answers. And that's what we in DPAA endeavor to do each and every day. But I would submit to you it's also moral imperative because these are your comrades in arms. My father is a Korean War Army enlisted soldier, infantryman, one-time combat veteran from Korean War, 2 times in Vietnam. Like you, he lost colleagues, comrades in arms that never came home. Like you, he looked to our government to fulfill that commitment, to fulfill that promise. And that's what we do. I'd like to give you just a quick snapshot and again turn it over to my colleagues to talk about some of the specifics. Our mission is bounded by World War II through Operation Iraqi Freedom. The numbers dropped precipitously between conflicts because we got better at personnel recovery. We got better at combat search and rescue. So if you look at today, 20 years of combat in Afghanistan, not a single MIA that we're looking for. And that's what Ann talked about that commitment that this nation has, that when we make the call and the decision to send men and women off to combat, we have to fulfill and complete that commitment. You would think that 46 countries, conflicts between World War II and Operation Iraqi Freedom, Vietnam War is our #1 operational priority. This is my 10th year in this mission. As it has been for the last 7 years, it is and will remain our #1 operational priority. We spend more resources, we send more people, and do more to account for those missing from the Vietnam War than any other conflict, bar none. There's several reasons for it. Ann talked about the fact one of the reasons is time is against us. First-hand witnesses are aging, they're dying, they're losing their memories. And so us accessing those members, those veterans, those villagers is imperative. Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia are undergoing tremendous development, urbanization. When dams are built, when railroads are put in, shopping malls, housing areas, they impact potentially sites where there might be a missing American. And then lastly, as I'm sure my colleague will talk about, the acidic soil in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia is literally disintegrating bone in front of our very eyes. So it is our number one operational priority and will remain our number one operational priority. It's also the conflict we know the most about. I guarantee you every single case, particularly those of your colleagues, your comrades in arms, is that thick. Because we have been doing this since the 70s, in earnest in the 80s, and we know the most about it. Let me give you a quick snapshot of what we will be doing in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Dave talked about the fact of when he went to Vietnam, when Ann was there earlier in the year. What we're getting from Vietnam is a continued commitment. These are the teams that we are going to put out in this coming fiscal year. I want to draw your attention to the 15 excavations, the 15 recovery teams. 30%, 5, will be conducted unilaterally by a Vietnamese team that we have trained, that we have the utmost confidence in. Dave talked about one of those unilateral missions at Hanme Island. That was conducted by a Vietnamese recovery team. There are only 2 countries that we entrust to do this work on our behalf, and we have the utmost confidence in. South Korea is one of them, Vietnam is the second. So 5 of those 15 recovery teams will be led by Vietnamese doing this important work. In Laos, we had a blip in the screen, blip on the radar, whereby we had some diplomatic issues with the Lao. We ended up having to cancel 9 recoveries, 3 investigations, but I'm pleased to say that we are back in full operation, full cooperation with Laos, having completed 1 recovery last month, and this Friday, 2 days from now, 126 people will deploy, half to Vietnam, half to Laos. In the coming fiscal year, we will conduct 15 recoveries and 5 investigations, as you see here, all in Laos. Now, as we turn to Cambodia, we have the least amount of missing. There are 48 that are still unaccounted for Cambodia. 2 sisters that you see here, their brother is one of those unaccounted for in Cambodia. Ann talked about the cooperation that we receive from the Cambodian government, and it goes to the highest level of the government. When the Prime Minister himself is knowledgeable to the point of talking about specific cases, you know that somebody's done something right. And that somebody is Ann and her organization, who for many years would visit and talk to these senior leaders about the importance of this mission. And so as we look ahead at what it is that DPAA will be doing in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in the coming fiscal year, you can see that it's rather robust. I'll draw your attention also to one other aspect which I think is important to share with you. We are one of the few organizations in the entire Pentagon enterprise that are authorized to establish private partnerships. And we do so with universities, non-governmental organizations that share our capabilities, that allow us to augment the work that we do, that more importantly bring such passion and dedication to this important work. One I'd like to highlight is Scripps Oceanographic Institute out of San Diego, Ann's hometown. world-renowned oceanographers, world-renowned underwater archaeologists. We put them in Vietnam. We had been talking to the Vietnamese for years about integrating these partners to augment the work that we do. Vietnam, a few years ago, finally allowed them to do that. Vietnam loves Scripps. And Scripps has done some incredible work off the coast of Vietnam, helping us do this work. Well, I'm pleased to say that we have partners now introduced in Cambodia and Vietnam that are augmenting the work that we do. And for the very first time, Laos has agreed, these are baby steps, but the team that is operating in Vietnam, that finished up in Laos last month, had 5 partners integrated with our team. The one next week will have 10. And by the end of the fiscal year, we hope to introduce partners to help us do more, to do it better, and to do it faster in all 3 countries. One more, please. You all know this. Budgets make the world go round. 3 years ago, we presented the Pentagon with a proposal to say, time is our enemy, numbers are daunting. Here's a proposal, give us more resources and allow us to do more. They did. Last year was the first year that they introduced an increase in our budget from $150 million to $190 million. But what happened, craziness of Washington, is we didn't get access to those funds until 6 months into the year because of something called a continuing resolution. Basically, it's a fancy word for saying the Congress didn't do its job in time in passing a budget. So 6 months into the fiscal year, we finally get the additional funds. The good news is that we are, by the way, we're now in another continuing resolution, which means Congress is still waiting to pass a budget for this fiscal year. The good news is that we began, in fact, today is the day we had access to those funds. Unlike last year, we will begin this year, today, with access to the entire $190 million. What does that mean? It means we don't have to start juggling and trying to figure out, okay, who we're going to hold back, when can we push them forward, and that's why this Friday, we have 126 people leaving for Vietnam and Laos to conduct this mission. So that's the good news and why this is such an important point. Now, what does this mean is with the additional funds, and this is what we told the Pentagon, is it will allow us to do more and to do it faster. And so just this year alone, there is an uptick of 33%, a 33% increase on more teams, recoveries, more investigations in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Some of the numbers, and our folks will talk about a particular case and how this works. You heard David mention, these are the hard cases. And in order to advance a case, to get it to the point where a Dr. Taylor is actually deploying to excavate a site like you saw in that first picture, it takes researchers, it takes analysts, it takes historians going through the archives to pull together enough information that narrows down an area with such that we can then send a field investigation team. And if they're able to, again, through witness interviews, talking to veterans, narrow it down even further, that's when we send the excavation team. So this master excavation list that you see on the screen there is when a case progresses through that continuum to get to the point where we are ready to send an archaeologist, anthropologist-led team to excavate a site. That excavation list, as you see here, the vast majority of cases on this list ready to excavate comes from this conflict, 58%, which means that there are 122 Vietnam War cases that are ready for us to send an excavation team to actually do what we call the heavy lifting. It takes, again, this continuum of support. And so on the front end, and you'll hear from one of our most talented analysts, Matt Kristoff, here in a minute, those analysts, those historians, GIS specialists, cartographers, all come together, as you see here, along with ops planners, to take the information gleaned from research, analysis, turn it into an actionable deployment where we're either sending an investigation team, working with our Stony Beach counterparts, or, more importantly, sending an excavation team. We've been doing this in earnest since the mid-'80s. In fact, Ann was there in 1982, if not beforehand, working to raise the nation's consciousness, but more importantly, to bring the Vietnamese, then the Lao, then the Cambodians to the table. And so as part of that arrangement, since 1985, we have held annual technical talks, consultations, with which we talk to the Vietnamese, Lao, and Cambodians to say, here's what we're looking at. Here's how we want to do this better. Here are some efficiencies. Here are some more effective means, methods, procedures. And over the years, they've been agreeable. Now, it hasn't always been easy, but what has happened is when people like Ann, Dave, when they go downrange and look them face to face in the eye and tell them why this is important for the United States through their eyes, it comes out readily. And that's why they enjoy such great response and support from these foreign officials, simply because they understand. They're the face, they're the heart of why we do this and why we are dependent upon them for cooperation. Dive missions were always challenging for us. When our teams deploy, they're there for 45 days. Backbreaking, brutal conditions, harsh environments. You can imagine mobilizing, operating, and then demobilizing a dive operation. You're wasting a lot of time. So he asked the Vietnamese, can we do this for 60 days? Can we do it for 75 days? And over time they said yes, which makes it easier for us to be able to do it more and to do it better. As we operate in remote locations, we would ask the Lao, can we look at base camping, where we establish a base of operations from which all, say, 3 teams are housed, and they go from there to their actual excavation site, as opposed to setting up 3 different base camps. Finally, they said yes. This takes time. Eric will talk here in a minute about mobile investigation unit, which again is another initiative raised with the Vietnamese, and as you heard Ann say, accepted by them. And so all of these efficiencies and effectiveness that, again, are dependent upon our foreign partners, our host nation partners, happens because of the trust and confidence that's been built up over the years. Now, you know, last one, please. This is a tool of diplomacy. It's an instrument of diplomacy. 10 years after the war, 10 years before normalization, we began this joint work with Vietnam. In the midst of economic sanctions, in the midst of trade embargoes. 10 years before, after the war, 10 years before normalization. Now, Ann talked about normalization. Next year will be the 30th anniversary of the reestablishment of an embassy and the reestablishment of diplomatic relations between the United States and Vietnam. You may not have been following, but last year, Vietnam elevated the United States. So they have different levels where they pigeonhole countries. For the longest time, we were at level 3. Because of this mission and the trust that's been built, that foundational element, Vietnam elevated the United States to the highest level. There, it had only been China, Russia, South Korea, and India. So one would think that as the relationship between the Vietnamese and the America increases across the board, economically, militarily, informationally. For those of you that have been back to Vietnam, you see the incredible economic progress, the prosperity, the stability within the country itself. One would think that as important as the relationship that they view the United States, that they would start pulling back with their commitment to this mission. Almost counterintuitive. That has not happened. Ann heard it. Dave heard it. 2 months ago, we hosted the Deputy Defense Minister in Hawaii. He said it. And it doesn't get any better than this. 2 weeks ago, Secretary Austin hosted his counterpart in the Pentagon, and at that meeting, the Defense Minister Zhang, said unequivocally, Vietnam will remain staunchly committed to the fullest possible accounting, and more importantly, helping us find those answers for the families, for you, your comrades in arms. And I find that absolutely encouraging that we're not getting lost in the shift, positive shift, the trajectory of an improved relationship, economic exchanges, military exchanges. I mean, we've had 2 carriers visit Cam Ranh Bay. Who would have ever thought that? Despite all of that, Vietnam is staunchly committed to ensuring that they continue to do their very best to help us with this mission. Thank you again to SOA and SFA. Thank you again to the POW MIA committee, Dave, and for the great work that you do. My Uncle Wade isn't here anymore, but for those of you that know Wade Ishimoto, I can tell you that when he goes anywhere in the Pentagon, he's been retired for many years. I cannot tell you the level of respect. We had the POW MIA National Recognition Day ceremony last month, and he was there at the parade field in the Pentagon. He had more people coming up to him to pay their respects. And so I look at Wade as an extension of you all, the respect and admiration that people have for you, and more importantly, Wade is just that extension of you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Director. I'd like to add a couple of things to what he's had to say. First off, the cooperation has been going both ways. Not only are the Vietnamese helping us, and the Laotians and Cambodians, but we're helping them with our forensic scientists and the things we're doing. When we cover up remains, we try to determine whether they were ours or theirs. And if they're theirs, we help them and get the information back to them so that they can recover their MIAs. So that cooperation has been able to work both ways, and that's very, very important. The other thing I want to say is the briefing you're about to get from the worker bees, as we'll call it, and Matt Kristoff will handle that. That all started about a year and a half ago. I had visited Hawaii, DPAA in Hawaii, and with some others, including Doug. And we got a briefing, and I saw a lot of things that were going on in the briefings, in the labs, and what they're doing, and things like that. And I got this silly brainstorm. It says, well, why don't we bring that information to you all? Well, that's going to take some efforts, and it's going to take some money, and going to take some commitments. Well, I worked with Colonel Brennan, who has now gone back to the 1st Marine Division. I feel bad for him. Anyway, we developed this plan, this idea of bringing what we brought last year, which was a case study. Well, put it all together, And of course, that needed approval. That's going to cost money and it's going to cost resources. Well, about 6 months after that, I was in DC with Doug, and we were having lunch with director, and we just about got done with lunch, and I had written this paper and trying to get the approval to what the plan was, and it went to Colonel Brennan, and then it went up, of course, the headquarters for approval. And I kind of was very sheepishly, I kind of leaned over to the director and says, you know that idea I had about bringing a team and doing a case study and coming here to SOAR and giving a briefing? And I says, is there anything on that? And he kind of leaned over and he says, it's approved. And that's why we have these case studies here now. So thank you very much, sir, for that. With that, I want to turn it over to Mac Christoph. He's put the plan together and coordinated it for this case study, which is going to be presented to you. It is very detailed in some ways, and it's going to give you a really great idea, as was brought out earlier, how the work that goes on. This work doesn't happen like a CSI episode. It doesn't happen in an hour. They go from start to finish. This happens over sometimes decades of work, research, information, and work, and then the identification once they've recovered anything. So please understand that. So what you get here in the next half hour or so, that's a long-term operation. So, Matt?
Okay, good morning. So as David said, we're going to walk you through a case and try to show you some details. Unlike last year, the case that we're going to talk about, we have not gotten an identification on this gentleman. Sergeant First Class Sam Padgett is who we're talking about. But as we talk through this case, there are two key takeaways that we would like you to go home with. The first is that the information that we got that got us to the crash site for this case, we would not have gotten without help from you all. And I'll talk about that in detail. So we need that help. It's imperative. As you all know, records on SOG cases are thin to non-existent. And so the information that we have in our files is frequently not very accurate, and there's not a lot there. The second key takeaway is that we want to show you the thoroughness of a full scientific excavation of a site in the field, okay? So help from you all and the thoroughness of excavations. So we're going to be talking about what we call case Refno 1125, which is Sergeant First Class Sam Padgett. It was in the vicinity of the Cam Duck Airfield, 10 April 68. So there were 5 guys on board. This helicopter crashed. Our record said that it was mechanical failure. That's essentially all we knew. We knew who was on board. Their names are listed there: Sergeant First Class Bryan, Sergeant First Class Cardosa, Captain Deverall, Sergeant First Class Wilcox, and there's a 2-man Vietnamese crew crewing that King Bee. Our information had that everybody perished, including the Vietnamese crew. And again, mechanical failure. That's essentially all we knew. We had a general ballpark of where this crash happened up at the end of the Cam Duck Airfield. And if you could see the A on there, the red A, right about there, that was the record loss location for this case, the location that was recorded in the surviving documents. And so between 1993 and 1997, we sent teams out on 3 different occasions trying to find this wreckage location, or trying to find wreckage at the record loss location. They went out there. You know the terrain out there is tough. They did not succeed in finding anything at that location. They went as far as they could. They expanded as far as they could. They were just not finding anything there at all. So the research continued. In 1997, because of 3 unsuccessful episodes trying to locate that crash site, the case went into a deferred status, essentially meaning we had exhausted all of the leads that we had, and it was back to the drawing board. We had to look for more leads. So analysts were continuing to research crash site reports, uncorrelated reports, doing enemy order of battle research, see if we could find out more pinpoint information about the enemy units in that area. We were doing imagery research, and in 2007, we coordinated with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency for some imagery analysis, and they came back with one particular photo that showed some wreckage, in their opinion. And we went back and at the B on that chart, that red B, that showed some potential aircraft wreckage. So a team went back, investigated that imagery location in 2008, and it turned out to be an operational loss. So nobody was lost from that wreckage. So at this point, it's once again, it's back to the drawing boards. We're trying to go through the files, what files exist on this case, looking for more information, anything that will help us. As we do that, we're working closely with our partners with Stony Beach. And I'm going to bring Eric Phillips up here now to talk about the things that Stony Beach would be doing at this phase on investigating a case. Eric?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to the committee, and especially thanks to all of you. It's always a battle among Stony Beach who gets to attend this every year, because you guys are such legends and, in my opinion, the greatest warriors our country's ever produced. So it truly is an honor to be able to come and hang out with you. As Matt said, I'm going to kind of talk about where Stony Beach fits into this. This particular case, we don't have a big role, so I'm going to kind of take a step back and give you more of a conceptual idea of what Stony Beach is doing all the time with these cases. So we're slightly different than DPAA. First off, we work for, there's our really boring slide. We work for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and we are also solely focused on the Vietnam War. We have 6 priorities in terms of our collection efforts, and last known alives are number 2, and number 3 are any SF cases. So you all are our priority. Our goal is really aimed at providing the fullest possible accounting, and what that means to us is telling you the story of what happened. Hopefully that leads to a recovery, but that isn't necessarily what drives our collection. And that word collection, some of you probably, I think all of you, understand what I mean by that. We are a little bit different because we are humenters. So the tool that we use to go about this mission is overt human. We operate out of defense attaché offices and under their authorities. And in that way, we're a little bit different. I'm not going to bore you all with that little circle, which is essentially the intel cycle. But the bottom line is there are gaps. And when it comes to cases, like this case we're talking about, there are major gaps in knowledge. Our job is to use human to fill those gaps. And that umbrella of human is very, very broad for us, and very different than our other colleagues at DIA, because this is a humanitarian mission. So it presents both unique challenges and unique opportunities for collection. So a lot of our collection is done bilaterally with the host nation. And as Ann and Director McKeague alluded to, our latest effort is to stand up what's called a mobile investigation unit in Vietnam. This doesn't mean that right now nobody's investigating things in Vietnam. What this MIU is designed to do is to augment current investigative mechanisms that we have and hopefully improve it. And what I mean by that is when you're investigating in a country like Vietnam, it's extremely bureaucratic. It's very communist. And it doesn't lend itself to dynamic investigations. We're trying to mitigate that by putting in some measures into our investigation unit. We want to keep it smaller. We want to be more mobile. We want to be able to flex and be able to, for example, if you're at a village and he says, well, this is what I know, but my neighbor over here, he knows a little bit more. Rather than have to go through the rigmarole of the Vietnamese bureaucratic process to be able to talk to this guy, we want to be able to go talk to him right then and there. And we want to be able to also prioritize and be able to hit cases that for all of you and for families are extremely important. That's the bilateral, kind of the easier, I don't know if easier is the right word, but those are when we're working with the host nation. Now there's also times where people have information that they might not want their own government to know that they have. Folks who maybe are on the outside looking in their country's power dynamics. And so that might be, for us, a lot of times those are remains traders. We have a Sergeant Norman Payne, who we recovered that way. Meeting with remains traders who handed us the remains. And then what we do is we turn that into an intel report and we send those remains to DPAA, which were eventually identified. So these are folks, these remains traders you're not going to be able to meet with them officially with the host nation government typically. Also, illegal loggers is one that we meet a lot with now, or poachers. Again, these are folks that are a little bit unsavory in their host nation, but they are out there in the same area where you guys were walking around. Well, now they're out there and they're finding stuff. And that's another way that we're able to gather a lot of information. In fact, I went out with Jim Shorten when he was in Cambodia, and we went to an old Jiraiya area, and with his eagle eyes, we went to a site that I was investigating because DPA analysts had been looking through archival information, and they decided that the grid cords that they had for this certain case, which is an aviator loss in 1968 during a SOG mission, and they asked me to go check out these new coordinates. I did. I talked with a lot of illegal loggers, and they said, "Oh yeah, we know this one wreckage area," so they took me there, and I went with Jim, and he was able to find some chicken plate, and we were able to turn that in again to an intel report that I hand over to DPAA. DPAA analyzes it and says, okay, yeah, this looks strong enough. So then they send a team out, they survey it, and if the survey yields enough result, then we go back and we excavate it. So that's how Stony Beach is always operating. And that last case is a good one, again, because it highlights the help that we receive from you all. And that would be my final pitch is if any of you have information, not only from your wartime experience, but I know a lot of you like to go back, or you have friends who are there. I'll be back sitting with Matt and would love to talk to you. If anything, just to hear your stories, because those are always inspiring, but especially if we can advance any of our knowledge on any case. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric. So adding to the knowledge that we knew on this specific case from the initial records, so 5 men on that helicopter, 5 Americans. A team went in a couple days later, a day or so later, after the fire was out, and they were able to discern the locations of 5 remains, and they were in very bad shape, as you can imagine. They were described as distinct gelatinous masses, and so they were able to bag those in 5 different bags. They were brought back, and about a week later, the mortuary let them know that they identified 4 out of those 5. They were able to get teeth out of what was left, and they were able to match those with dental records and make 4 identifications. This was immediately after the incident. The 5th, they got teeth out of the 5th bag as well, but those teeth were from a pig. And it makes sense because there was a pig on board that helicopter. It was going to be food for the indigenous. So we knew that if we ever got to this site, the best hope we had of getting were going to be teeth. So moving forward, we don't have a lot of information. We've been talking with Stony Beach. We're looking. We need help on this case. 2012, we're here at SOAR. In the hospitality room, we always provide what we call our leaflet drop. We put pages on each table in there about cases that we need help with. And we made our leaflet drop. We're talking to a bunch of folks, and at one point, a gentleman comes forward and starts talking to us, and he says, "Hey, I heard you need help on this particular case." We said, "Yes." And he sat down, started talking to us, and he said, "Well, I was on that helicopter." And, we couldn't believe that because there was nothing in the record that indicated that. He said, "No, I was on that helicopter, and we were all coming back from 1-0 school. And as we were coming back to Cam Duck, we had another location outside the airfield where we had some indigenous forces." And he said, "I asked the chopper to land there, and he got out. And he was working with the Indige there at that hilltop. Chopper took off again, and very shortly it was shot down." And so the veteran that came to the table and was telling us this was your own Pat Watkins. So we sat down with Pat, we got the maps out, and over the course of several sessions, many hours, we tried working out exactly where he thought it was, because he told us that his best friend was one of those guys on that helicopter, and his hooch mate was another one of the guys on that chopper. And so Pat was adamant about helping us. So we talked through the case, and Pat told us that, the fire was too hot the first day, and so they went. It was a day and a half or so later, and he volunteered to go in with the recovery team to recover the remains. So he was involved in that as well, and possibly others here. So in sitting down with Pat, we tried figuring out, well, from that hilltop, which is located up in there, from that hilltop, do you know how far you went or which direction? And he really couldn't remember. You could see the terrain is pretty diverse as you come down off of that hill. So we tried to establish a left limit. It was no farther left than about here, and a right limit. And were you going up and downhill a lot, or was it relatively flat? We talked through all of that, and then we tried figuring out how far he went from that hilltop. Again, a lot of time has passed since then. A lot of missions have happened since then, and so it's hard to narrow that down sometimes. But he did a lot of work through this. Again, several sessions with us, and we came down with that. It's not really a search box; it's more of a range fan, and in there on red, and we came back, we wrote an investigation proposal, we got it approved. The next time we had a team out in that area, they went to this site. It was the last site they were investigating during that joint field activity, and they talked to the landowner. The landowner was a guy about 40 years old, and he wasn't there during the war, he wasn't around, and he really didn't know anything about wreckage on his property. And so the team was kind of frustrated, and at this point they were basically waiting for the choppers to come to depart, and they were going to start post-mission recovery cleanup operations. And there was a delay with the helicopters, and so the analyst on the team starts going around asking questions, and Cliff, yeah, it was your buddy Ray who was asking questions, as he always does. Ray Kern does a fantastic job for us. Ray was talking to folks that worked on that farm, and the owner came over again when he saw that they were all talking, having a smoke break. And Ray started asking him questions if there were any elderly people around that might know something. And the owner thought for a while, and then he said, you know, there's this lady, she's still working out here, and she might have some information. And Ray asked if we could talk to her. The guy sent for the lady, they brought her over, and through an interpreter, they were speaking with her, and she said, you know, I think I know exactly what you're looking for. And so they got all excited, and long about then, the mission was over. They had to come back. They had to depart. And so the next time we had a team in the area, we sent one on the next mission, and Ray was also on that team as the lead analyst. They got with this lady again. She took them to the site, and that site, if you look within that range fan, if you could see that yellow star, that's exactly where the wreckage was. So at that point, we came back and started writing an excavation proposal using all of this information. They did a very thorough site survey when they were out there. And like I said before, I used the same slide last year talking about this point in the process because we want to emphasize just because we think we have information and it's good enough to put shovels in the ground doesn't mean we could just expend resources and do that. We have to make the case. So all of our analysis is put into this. Reports from the field. It's written and staffed by analysts, historians, lab personnel, and several levels of leadership. It's not an automatic process. These things can get disapproved if we don't do our work well. So we had what we believe to be good information on this case. We put a good packet together. It was approved, and the site was added to the master excavation list. And at this point, it goes over to the planners, and it's on them to get the scheduling, the right weather window, the right team to get in there to do a recovery. So at this point, to talk about that recovery, I'd like to introduce Dr. Rebecca Taylor, one of the scientific recovery experts from our lab.
Sorry, excuse my little notes. I'm always bad with numbers, so I wanted to make sure I have everything. But thank you for having me today. I'm kind of taking over kind of that next step. So we kind of talked about all the research, putting kind of that really fine-tuned X on the map. And so at this point, what do the scientific recovery experts do? How do we go about a site? How do we process that site to ensure that we are maximizing our resources and also maximizing the ability to get you answers? So I will jump right into it. Last year, I know that Dr. Nicolette Parr kind of went through the operations for you, kind of where the laboratory comes into play within DPAA. That's the three components that we really focus on. Today, we're going to really focus on the field operations portion and can kind of address some of the questions that you may have with laboratory operations and identification, because as already mentioned, this is one of the cases where we are still searching for Sergeant First Class Padgett. So this site, as you can see, there's a lot of colors. I tried to make this as big as possible so you could all see it, but there's a lot of work that has been completed at site VN 0326. The excavations started in August of 2016 and continued for a subsequent 7 JFAs, so a total of 8 excavations. The total for excavated at this site was 2,242 square meters. That's of surface area. That is not depth. I like to highlight that because one of the things that you probably noticed in the maps is this is the Annamite mountain range. It is made up of several what we call fingerlings, which are steep-ridged, like finger extensions. So you have these steep-walled ridges with then these ravines in between. And the site is one of those fingerlings. As a matter of fact, at a crux of two fingers that kind of come out of the mountain range, and then is dotted with the intermittent stream bed. So you kind of think about this come and go stream bed, this mountain range area. Okay, this is going to be an operational difficult mission as far as excavation strategy. And that is one reason why in these totals that you see for each of the missions varies. Because you're like, wait, how did, like, you did 301 year and only 90, like, the next year. And that's a lot of dealing with where they were excavating at the time of that mission. So I just want to highlight that it was not due to the fact of the team was not able to do their job. It's just more the difficulty and the issues that they had to overcome on a particular mission. So what I am going to do is I'm actually going to walk you through each one of these JFAs and kind of how we progressed this site and what are the tools and techniques that we used to then advance each of those excavation strategies. But before I get into that, I want to talk to you a little bit about our approach to archaeology. What do we do as a scientific recovery expert? Because we differ a little bit from Indiana Jones. We really do. As most people, you think about, like, okay, I go in, I have a sole purpose, I dig it, I will find what I'm looking for. But there's a lot of factors that go into it. And in particular with DPAA, that is one of the things that we do is focusing on an evidence-driven approach. And what do we mean by that? Is that when I'm at a site, I'm going to be looking at things that are going to inform me about the type of aircraft I'm looking for, or if it's a burial, those factors that would play into identifying a burial. And then I'm also looking for things that serve as a proxy for human remains. And what do I mean by proxy? Things that would be associated with a person. So if I'm in an aircraft, I'm looking for an aircraft crash, I'm going to be looking for things like flight suit, helmet, oxygen masks, things that are going to be close to a body and help with survival. If I'm looking for a ground loss, I might be looking for some of the, like, there are additional, like, jungle boots versus a pilot boot. So those are things that I might be looking for that might be different. The other things we were looking at is things like personal effects. Like your dog tags, extremely important, things like eyeglasses, rings. Those are things that we would say, okay, would be close to where a body is. So you have your life support, your material evidence. One of the things that is most difficult for us is that, and that Matt kind of touched on, is aircraft wreckage. Some sites, we have an abundance of aircraft wreckage because of the nature of the crash and the land use around the aircraft. And because of that, they're what we consider the least probative, because if I have a bunch of pieces of a non-diagnostic aircraft, I know I have an aircraft crash, but where am I going to focus my excavation? And that's one of the first things that we have to do is say, when we go to a site, where are we going to dig first? Because I can't touch everything at the same time. So I need to focus my efforts on those areas that I know are going to be more likely to get something in return. So that brings me to kind of the next step. The next step is thinking about where am I going to then focus? What I just mentioned. So the units that are around something that is going to be personal and military items are going to be the units that are more likely to produce remains. That's where I'm going to focus my efforts. So the highest concentration of aircraft wreckage, diagnostic aircraft wreckage, personal effects, that is where I'm going to focus. The areas where I might have less debris, that is going to be the least probative. So we may not be focusing our efforts there. It doesn't mean we're not going to excavate. It just means, hey, I'm going to do this area first. So kind of directing our motivations. To kind of help you with this, I want to just walk through a little bit of a scenario for you. And this was supposed to be animated. That figures. I should have done that. So the first step, and I'm going to point this out. So you have up here, this would be our first excavation. And in this is that an investigative team identified a depression. That depression looks very similar to like an aircraft crash depression. So, okay, I'm going to be focusing my efforts and start there. Very light debris field. We got a little bit heavier debris field. So we're like, okay, I have a higher concentration of aircraft wreckage. I'm going to then move and focus and expand at that location. And that's what you're seeing here is the expansion. So you kind of that corner and moving outward and in multiple directions, kind of expanding that. Then you move and you're, okay, I expanded that. I find what we consider an abbreviation as ME is for material evidence, OS is osseous, and LSE is life support equipment. So I find those are very key. Okay, this is where I should be focusing my efforts. And the reason why I bring this up is that sometimes, okay, I have a very large excavation now. I need to go out. I'm the next scientific recovery expert going to the site. What do I dig now? And so that's what we use. A lot of this is I'm going to be focusing my efforts over here because osseous, that's what I'm going for. I'm going to go for that. So those are going to be my primary efforts. But this is why on some missions, people are like, well, why'd you excavate over here? And then next mission, someone excavated over here. And that's because we found something that, like going back into the lab, we looked at the material and said, hey, this is actually really good. We need to be looking further in this area. So that's why in some missions, you might be focusing on the southern area of a site. In the next mission, we focus on the eastern extent of that site. It's not because we have our preference on one side or next. We're focusing on where the evidence is taking us. Okay, so with that, let's kind of take a step back and look at this site. Okay. So one of the first things that we do in a site that we go, any site we go to, is establishing a site datum. So that's our point of reference. Now, one of the challenges at this particular site was its land use history. It was used for slash and burn agriculture for the last 60 years. And a lot of the plants, and we're not talking about like corn, we're talking about trees, particularly acacia trees. They're like paper-making trees, are a very popular cash crop in Vietnam. What they do is that you'll have like the harvest, they grow for a short period of time, very fast growing, and they cut them down. Throughout our missions at this site, they actually planted new saplings multiple times, which is a very common thing for them to do throughout Vietnam at the sites that we were working. So when we first went to this site, we established a datum, which is here. It was actually a tree. Well, you know, it's like if that's their cash crop and that they cut it down, that's probably not the best datum that you have. So what we actually did on a subsequent mission is replace that with a concrete rebar datum. So we pour like a small bit of concrete and put a rebar datum that's below ground that we can then find with a metal detector that then is also triangulated into 3 directions. So we actually can put it back in if it gets removed and we have a more stable base. This was really important at this location. So we had actually 2 data. And you're like, well, why would you want that? Well, one was at the top of the ridge and the other's on the slope. So that allowed us to tie everything back in to one grid. Kind of going back to that slide here is one of the things that's really important for us is the spatial relationship of materials. So establishing a solid datum gives us an opportunity to establish a grid system that we can then tie everything back to a relationship. How is it related? Where is it found in space? So throughout the missions, we actually established the datum every single time. So that datum was used for every JFA. So everything was tied back into the same map. And that's what you saw in that initial slide. How did we do this? This was done by compass and tape and a theodolite transit. So if those of you are familiar with the Brunton compass, a lot of us are like, I'm a big fan of just the Brunton compass. A lot of people are like, you're a little old school with that because you have all this fancy equipment. But sometimes, depending on the ruggedness of the terrain, sometimes that is the best tool we have, and it's easily transportable in your backpack as opposed to the 25-pound theodolite transit. That's just me. I like to carry as little as possible if I can get away with it. But I really wanted to stress the site Datum because a lot of people forget that it's really important for that spatial awareness. So that's our first priority. Then the next priority is vegetation clearing. Because you're like, well, why don't you just take everything down? Just cut everything down. Well, we can't do that. It's a combination of land, property and land compensation. But the other thing is that the more landscape and more trees we remove, the destabilization of the earth. So there's nothing for the plants to hold on to. And because of that, that destabilizes this ridgeline. And why is that a factor? Remember, it has an intermittent stream that runs through it. So every time it rained, you had removal and transport of sediments. So we wanted to only uncover the areas that we would be focusing on, so that way we would have less chance of things moving. Can I think about creating a landslide effect? So one of the first things we do is we take out all of the underbrush. Most of this is done by local laborers using machetes. Even because the trees are all small saplings, or small hardwoods in this area, we will keep most of them until we're excavating a specific unit. So that first JFA, and you will see maps, not that really pretty map, but I purposely have the maps that each of the archaeologists created for the JFAs to show you kind of some of the variations in the work. And also not to try to make it unreadable for you. But the excavation here started right in the middle. This area was actually divided into 3 different areas because of the diversity of the terrain. The first area is the westernmost portion of the site, which was a flat ridge top. That also acted as a emergency LZ and actually some construction, because we already mentioned the urbanization and of a lot of Vietnam. They were doing construction very close by to this site, so it was really imperative to excavate and excavate as quickly as possible. So this area is area A. The middle area right here is B, and then the ravine, which is right here, is C. Is that area B was identified as the highest concentration of aircraft wreckage. So that is where we decided through transect surveys, explosive ordnance disposal surveys with metal detector and pedestrian surveys, just looking at what's on the surface. We honed in on an area that we believed would give us the maximum production of material. And that would be area B. And that is where excavation started, as I said, in 2016. During this mission, the really interesting thing that we found, and probably not as informative, you're like, but you didn't find any remains, so why does it matter? Well, one of the things that matters is, yes, we had aircraft wreckage at this site, but we didn't know if we in fact had the right aircraft. And so when we go to a site, one of the things that we are looking for, yes, I want to find bone. I want to get that identification, but sometimes finding the pieces to the puzzle are just as informative as we work through a site. So with this one, is that you'll see you found a rotor blades and rocker arms. Now you're like, well, okay, what does that tell me? Well, this tells me it represents a rotary winged aircraft powered by a piston-driven engine that's characteristic of the CH-34 helicopter, which is different than the more common UH helicopter that was used. And because of that, it's specific to a CH-34. We can't tell you it's that CH-34, but that is another piece of the puzzle. So we have corroborating information from those witness testimony from both the local as well as our own, saying, okay, we're in the right spot. Okay, let's keep excavating. Let's keep going back. So that's where the second JFA comes in. The second JFA, you can see a little bit prettier of a map where you're like, okay, there's not as much lines going on. I can see what's going on here. They expanded the crash. So that little triangle in the middle, that's the datum. So we expanded on the datum. And we have moving closer to the ridge line. So that's what you're seeing. These little arrows on there are showing that there's a slope coming up. And that's a pretty significant slope. It was once we reached that, the average slope was about 50 to 70 degrees going into the ravine, where most of the rest of the site was between 20 and 40 degrees. So with the JFA is that they excavated a significant amount. They recovered material evidence and life support equipment. This team utilized what we can traditionally think as standard archaeological equipment. I'm going to go right here. And what we mean by that is that we predominantly used hand tools. The flat end shovel is one of our most prized tools with our excavations, and specifically flat end shovel, because that gets you that fine wall that you see in a lot of our excavations, but also it is something that we can control a lot more. One of the things I mentioned, we don't cut down and rip out all those trees. We will cut them down as we're moving into an excavation unit, and then we will actually dig around all of the roots before the root ball is removed to ensure that anything is not captured within that root cluster. Before and after a unit is excavated, we will do an EOD survey of that, because it helps us with aircraft wreckage, but also to ensure safety of our personnel in case there is any UXO within the area because of the amount of bombing and also some of the payloads that were on the aircrafts that we found, that we try to find. When we got closer to the ridge, one of the other things that we had to employ is handrails and tie-ins. So what you can't see really hard because of all of the vegetation is that everyone's in harnesses that are tied in. So we employ mountaineers, and mountaineers ended up having to go to this site, and they serve to help kind of create some of those safety lines. It doesn't mean people were hanging off a cliffside. It's just more when you're thinking about, I have to handle equipment, I can't be holding on and bracing myself at the same time. So it allows us to get into some of those steeper areas safely. Through the first two excavations, we utilized what we call as dry screening operations. Most of this is where we have the dirt from a unit is bucketed. That will be carried through a bucket line to a 1/4-inch screen mesh that we then shake and sift. And it's a combination of using local laborers as well as U.S. personnel to oversee those local laborers to then go through and pick out anything that could potentially be probative. And that is placed into what we call evidence buckets. Those evidence buckets then go to our life support investigator and the SRE to go through. And we do that thing from every single unit into one area. And look, we want to maintain that provenience, that location on the map that I was referring to. So this is the primary excavation strategy that was used throughout the operations. But as we progress, you will see some slight variations to this. We move into the third JFA. This JFA was a little bit different because they jumped into the ravine area. And one of the reasons for this is that we couldn't excavate the area between these two quite yet. We couldn't go onto the slope because we needed a base of operations on the bottom. Because if I take the dirt off a slope, where is it going to go? It's going to go and fall onto the bottom. So I needed to make a clear floor that I could then work to ensure that I'm not burying evidence under further sediment. So I wanted to make sure, okay, we have where we can continue to work. And that is why they jumped into the ravine area. And this is kind of showing that ravine area. It gives you, the photos, I will say, are very difficult here because you're like, everything looks so flat. It's really hard to get a sense of the steepness and what you're looking at. But that's one reason why anytime we excavate, one of the things we also do at the end of the JFAs is we outline everything in engineer tape and take photographs so we have a clear outline of what we did during that JFA due to some things that are outside of our control. Again, land use and the environment, because this is an intermittent stream bed. So one of the things that we had learned, and we'll see in just shortly, is that a lot of sediment transport occurred. And so one of the things that our scientists have to be able to do is read the soils. What happened? How do I direct my excavation to get to that point? How do I figure out that I've excavated deep enough? And we have to be able to, again, read that soil. And that's what we mean by understanding the landscape. Because I purposely put this up here because, again, most of you are like, okay, you just have a picture of a wall. Like, what does that mean? Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. This is the stratigraphy of just one unit within the ravine. And this is one of the first units that was excavated within the ravine. And you see there's actually two separate distinct profiles that you're seeing. And this is actually a hand-drawn map to represent the differences that you're seeing going on in this profile. So there's distinct layers. And what these layers are telling us is that there's been a lot of transport of sediments over the incident. So you had what was the incident base, so we call our incident layer, where the aircraft wreckage is being located, where the material that is of evidentiary value is being located. But then there's all the stuff that's been put on top of it. And then you had people farm, so all that stuff on the top of it was churned. So in some areas, we had over 2 meters of what we had to then screen through. We couldn't just say, oh, this is overburden, this, I can get rid of it. No, because all of it was churned together. So it really expanded our operations, so that way the depths at this site varied from 30 centimeters below surface to 336 centimeters below surface. So kind of giving you a point out of what that looks like is moving into the 4th JFA, and this focused on the ravine, and now that we kind of understood what was going on, we did a little bit more in the upper slope area. So that was anything that's kind of in the pink color is what is represented by this JFA. But the red arrows you see point to a very thin incident layer. And you noticed in some areas it's pretty close to the surface. In other areas it's pretty deep. And that's because in the movement, due to, there was at least 3 different slumping events that we identified. And you're like, what do you mean by slumping events? And it's where the hillside became unstable and fell. We see it quite often in Hawaii, sadly, where it's like all of a sudden you're driving down the highway and you have a part of the cliffside kind of gives away. And that basically is what is happening in this area. And then you have landslides, like high water movement events. And by doing that, it's covering up what was the primary incident. And that's one reason why it was really difficult to find aircraft wreckage and other informative information. So it required our SREs to then come up with different ways of going through the sediments, because as we're going down, we're getting into heavier and heavier clays. So because of that, and also the issue of, well, where do I screen all the dirt that I'm moving if I'm in now this ravine that has a very small space? We had to move down slope, which is actually to the north. So you're like, why'd you do that? Now you're making me stand on my head to see this map. So we actually created chutes. So to move as much sediment as possible, we created these long tube chutes that then went to a collection point where then we could start that bucket line, because we couldn't have a 200-person bucket line. That's just not plausible. And we also needed to think about safety. So that's where we actually also employed at this JFA, we employed water screening. And yes, my accent comes in when I say that, no matter what I do, so sorry. But what that means is that we are, instead of sitting there sifting with our hands and what we call dry screening, we're actually using water to help break up these clay sediments. And what we do is both low pressure or high pressure, depending on the toughness of the clay. And in this case is that we employed high pressure wet screening, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So here is taking a step back, because I told you about the land use. You're like, oh, you guys created this awesome dam. This looks great. Is that on this JFA is that they decided between the JFAs to establish a fish pond on the site as well. So we had to contend with that. But the fish pond also helped us because it actually created a little pond that we could draw water from. And we got permission to do that, as well as pulling from the intermittent stream that we also dammed to collect water, and then used several water pump generators to pump the water from those areas to a high pressure wet screening operation. So by the 6th JFA, you're like, well, what did you find? You guys are not telling me what I found. I'll get to that. I will, I promise. Moving to the 7th JFA, you can get a bit of extent of our excavation. So these are our overall photos. So we have now fully excavated everything upslope into the ravine. We have covered most of the western portion of the site. We've got most of the ravine, and at this point we're looking at, okay, where do we go next? And so a lot of our efforts focused on the base of the ravine, which is the head of the ravine and that intermittent stream bed. So those types of locations are usually really good for pooling of materials. So moving into the 8th JFA, that final JFA, showing you pictures of, again, our sediment transport. This is all of this sediment at this point is in high pressured wet screening. So this is what we always put it on a platform and have basically fire hoses that run through the top. And that then is manned where we can run a lot more sediments much faster, and then it cleans off anything that we are looking for, like aircraft wreckage material evidence. Here you get a sense of how much that area has been cleared off. So the results of all of these excavations. So all of the black dots you see are material evidence. All of the green dots are life support equipment. Some important finds that we did find is that, and kind of just showing you the variety, is you have your standard military issued buttons. We have grommets, boot eyelets. We also recovered the jungle boot webbing, the wire mesh webbing. We had several pieces of watch band and watch backs and the wristbands of the Psycho watches. One of the more interesting and also informative pieces is this, because this is a Vietnam Army, so ARVN military insignia. Remember, there was 2 Vietnamese on board. And so that actually helps build the case, okay, we're in the right spot. And then we found possible osseous. And you're like, oh, that's great. Remember we mentioned that pig? We also found more of the pig, which was very, very disappointing because we got super excited because this was found on the 6th JFA, and you're like, okay, we got all of this material evidence. We got all of this life support. We got diagnostic aircraft, like we have everything to say we are in the right spot. And sadly, the only osseous we had that we recovered came back as non-human. And at this point, where else do we go? Because you look at this map and you saw where we started, and we have now thoroughly excavated everything that we deemed where materials would be transported. Where else do we go? Because the stream bed is now completely excavated, the hillside's completely excavated. And so at the end of this JFA, we deemed that we have reached our archaeological limits. We're not finding anything else. Everything we have expanded beyond where evidence was, all we're finding is really small bomb fragmentation. And so we were kind of at a loss there. So a couple of things to mention to kind of finish up today. I mentioned, well, how do I know that that's pig bone? And where do I learn that? Is that particularly in Vietnam, we conduct joint field activities or field forensic reviews at the time of the JFAs. And so all of the possible osseous was actually eliminated from being evidence at the end of the JFA because it was, to our scientists, was very clearly non-human bone. The other thing we have done is that we have established the Vietnam Identification Project. Most of you that came last year met Dr. Nicolette Parr, who is the project lead. So she is a dedicated analyst within the laboratory to Vietnam. All of us work cases that come in, but having a dedicated project lead helps us with the more complicated scenarios. The other thing we do is that we are continually looking at ways to advance and innovate to advance accounting efforts. So a couple of the initiatives that we are doing in the laboratory are stable isotope analysis. That's something we do in-house, and we're constantly building that. That helps us with human, non-human bone identification now. We're bringing that online. That's something that is, if you're talking about comparing DNA to that, you're very quickly can identify, okay, this is non-human bone. We are also using stable isotope analysis for country and home of origin, kind of thinking about 50 years ago, we have very different diets, and so we can determine, okay, this person's more likely Southeast Asian versus from the US, based on stable isotopes. And then the last part of the stable isotopes, we're actually bringing oxygen online to determine that home of origin. So where in the United States? And we've actually used this as a proof of concept for a Vietnam case a few years ago, where we can actually highlight in a particular region of the country where someone could be from. The other thing that we are doing with our partners at AFDL, the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory, is the use of SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms. Yes, a nice mouthful. Now you know why it's called SNPs on the board. But SNPs allows us to use nuclear DNA that we couldn't do in a lot of cases but also allows us to expand our family of references we draw from. So a lot of our cases where we might have a paternal niece, we couldn't use them as a reference. With SNPs, we're able to use them as a reference. So kind of increasing that pool. The other thing, we're working with our partners at the University of Central Florida on laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy. You're like, now another big mouthful. But LIBS is actually, it looks like a little pointer like this, and you can shoot the bone and get its chemical elemental breakdown, and it helps segregate remains from commingled assemblages, mixed up assemblages, because you have a unique elemental signature that's unique to you and someone else has a different one. We're actually focusing this on our underwater sites because we talk about expanding the scope of the underwater recoveries within Vietnam. This is something that's really going to be helpful with those multi-person losses. The last thing that we're also working on is data analytics. And you're like, another big word? Come on. But with data analytics is looking at big data sets. One of the challenges that we have, particularly with Vietnam, is digging at the right time of the year at a particular location. So right now we're using all of our identification data. When did we recover evidence? When's the most that we've excavated a site, and combining that with climatic data. So looking at these patterns in data to then help us better inform our recovery efforts. So that way we're making sure that we have the greatest success in recovery for that purpose. So with that, some good news. So this past FY, we have identified 4 first-time identifications for the Vietnam War, and also 7 additional portions of remains, which means that just more pieces of someone that has been previously resolved, which unfortunately is something that is common in our business. I know that I have completely went over, but I will turn it over.
No worries. Can I get all the speakers just in front of the chairs standing up? Spoke. We're a little behind, so I'm gonna keep it short and go straight into Q&A. But my name's Master Sergeant Ben Sievert. I'm the Army Senior Enlisted Leader for the DPAA. I'm a 5th grouper, so I call the Legion home. As you can see on the slide, what we wanted to do was specifically focus on SOG and like those SOG cases, air support in support of SOG missions, as well as SOG support personnel. Miss Jeannie Huffman did an amazing job at the posters off to my right of really like visualizing those names with those, like identify like the personnel we are still missing. And I just want to say thank you for the invitation, allowing us to come out here through the National League of POW MIA Families, Mission POW MIA, Stony Beach, and DIA, as well as the DPA. We all work collectively together to continue that ongoing mission of fulfilling our nation's promise and continue searching until they all come home. That's it.
I know we went a little bit over. However, going into lunch, it's a buffet, and the line is always long anyway, so unless you really want to stand in line, you can go rushing out of here. We did have planned for a question and answer. I don't really think that's appropriate right now to do it in here. What I would suggest is everybody will be here, will be in the hospitality room for the rest of the day, except for the director. He's got a flight to catch, and he said he wanted to get out of here in a hurry anyway before he got captured. So anyway, I want to thank all of you for your presentations. The information is great. This is what I'm going to continue to try to do in our symposiums, is to get down to the nitty-gritty earth of what's going on. And I appreciate your attendance and your cooperation and listening, and thank you very much. Please.